Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we're broadcasting from our usual spot, although my producer, Leslie Benson, is not on hand today in the same spot because we're quarantined. We are here in California, which is part of a statewide shutdown and shelter in place, and businesses closed. It's very strange times. And so, as I talk about the current astrology, it's very difficult to talk about anything but the coronavirus. However, this is not a broadcast about the coronavirus. It may come up, it will come up. We do want to look at transits to the United States chart. And the reason we're going to do that in this particular new moon coming up late Monday night, early Tuesday morning, is because we actually note that this particular new moon has very powerful transits to the U.S. chart, which are dramatic in how they seem to outline the scene, which is going on here in the United States. I'm most interested in that right now, partly because many of you are United States people, and the ones that are not, I think you'll be interested because, of course, it has a lot to do with concepts such as mundane astrology, concepts such as what is going on in the United States, which is always a big topic since it's such a, you could say world leader. I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. You could say big country, a rich country. You could say that for sure. It's, I think, one of the four largest countries in the world, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, enough of preliminaries. I want to talk about this new moon, not only from the standpoint of what's going on in the society, but just from the standpoint of how it feels on an individual basis. And let's go ahead and take a look at the chart, and you'll see what I'm getting at here. So you should be able to see the chart. And the thing that's striking about this chart, of course, there's several things actually that's striking about this chart. But, besides the fact that it is the new moon, it is right on the Aries point at 4 degrees of Aries, 5 degrees is Chiron, so conjunct Chiron, very interesting there. The other thing to recognize, though, and it just jumps right out at you, look at this triple conjunction of planets. It is Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars, and it is not only that, they are very close together. They are not all in the same degree. They are 1 degree apart. So we have 23.5 degrees, 24.5 degrees roughly, and 25.5. So this is very tight. And when I looked at that originally, I thought, whoa, what I'm saying now, in kind of 2020 hindsight, is that really we have a 3 Pluto points in the year, and this is one of them. So the thing that was very crucial to the whole 2020 year, all astrologers talking about it, was the conjunction between Pluto and Saturn. Saturn has moved beyond this grouping for the moment. So that conjunction of Pluto and Saturn was actually accompanied by a full moon eclipse as well, with the Sun conjunct Mercury very close by. That was at 22 degrees of Capricorn, and that happened on January 10th. And astrologers all over the world have been saying for many, many months now that 2020 was going to be a big year, very dramatic year, a big societal change, huge changes coming down. And the inflection points were this January 10th to 12th. Exact on the 12th, January 10th was the eclipse, the full moon eclipse. And, the thing we were saying back then, before we knew about the coronavirus being such a huge factor, let's face it, we're in a completely different world situation than we were. We thought, about the political situation. We could see that was heating up. There is a decided shift that's going on between more conservative vision, which would be sort of top down, and the people that are most worthy, the ones that are the wealthy ones, are the ones that should get the most attention. The people that are not worthy, that is to say, they don't have a lot of money, the people on the fringes of society, were to be more or less taken out of the equation to whatever extent possible. The Republicans even saying that they would love to see a little bit less voting, and the Democrats, in their efforts to create more voting, were called by the Republicans, I believe the quote was, it's a Democratic conspiracy to increase voting, which is favorable to Democrats, of course, because more people of all income levels voting usually is favorable to the Democrats. I'm not taking sides here. I'm just saying what I see. And it's true that Pluto and Saturn together has been termed conservative empowerment by Rick Tarnas in his fantastic landmark book, Cosmos and Psyche, which came out around 2005. He does call that particular conjunction, he calls it a world transit. He calls these combinations of outer planets world transits. And he says that that is conservative empowerment. He likens it to the beginning of World War I, also many other occasions that I can hardly remember now. But the thing that is interesting is the previous conjunction of Pluto and Saturn was 1982, and we did see a very strong Republican government in place with Ronald Reagan, which was kind of a reaction to the 60s, 70s. And, he was called the Teflon president. Nothing could harm him, no scandal could touch him, everything bounced off him. We're seeing a very similar phenomenon in this day and age with the Trump situation where he can't really get in trouble, no matter how much he does what seems to be perhaps violations of the law, violations of common sense, violations of standards of discourse. He always gets away with it. It's like he's a great guy, he's making the thing happen, got tax relief for the upper 1%, which was wanted. And so anyway, I think it's a very similar situation in that regard going into 2020, or in the early part of 2020 when he was in the impeachment trial, which he kind of very handily beat them off, with a wave of his stick, But now we're in a different situation here. And I think now we're beginning to see what this Saturn-Pluto year of 2020 is all about. The second inflection point in 2020, as I was alluding to, is the November 15th triple conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter. And that's when Saturn, as you can see, has passed these Capricorn planets, just entered into Aquarius, actually. When Saturn does retrograde another degree along and go backwards, it'll eventually rejoin Pluto, which doesn't do much except go back and forth a little bit in Capricorn, right? It'll eventually retrograde pretty soon, actually, and then back a little way and then back forward. So they come together again, and as they come together again, Jupiter does a similar dance and comes together with them. So the three of them are lined up November 15th, and I was looking at that as really significant considering the election in November. However, now in this light of this new event, this coronavirus event, we really do have to think of it also in terms of how the coronavirus is hitting this country, and that is a big factor, and maybe the biggest factor in this whole Pluto situation. And this particular new moon, with Jupiter, with Pluto, with Mars, all lined up like this, they also are connected to the new moon. Believe it or not, they make a quintile. The new moon, I should say, makes a quintile to these planets, to the midpoint by about 2 degrees. So they're tied into the new moon. They have this huge stellium, huge in the sense that they're so close together. And I think we want to talk about this in personal terms as well as in societal terms, even though it's so tempting, as I say, to talk about what's happening in the society being so radical and such different situation than we've ever seen before in this country, maybe for 100 years with the pandemic of 1918. So I'd like to say a few more things about what's going on with this new moon. And I think it's very important to recognize that in the midst of this, even though we have this huge stellium, we also have a close conjunction between the new moon and with Chiron. And that's significant because Chiron is the wounded healer. It has to do with inner wounding. It has to do with the recognition of inner wounding. And we're just coming out of Mercury retrograde, which is all about going inside, taking a look inside. From the natural chart, it's in the 12th house. That's the inner realms. Neptune has been very involved in these recent configurations, not so much in this one. And Neptune does refer also to this unconscious depths that we have that may be much more vast than our conscious part. It's been likened to an iceberg. You have the conscious part of ourselves poking up above the surface of the unconscious, which is vast and huge, and filled with creatures. It says one prominent astrologer talking about the day consciousness and the night consciousness, which are different things. And in the night consciousness, you have many forms, and you have dreams. And the dreams tell us about our unconscious. And all of that is very up right now. I mean, the unconscious is part of this whole Mercury retrograde through Pisces, also the prominence of Neptune recently. And now Mercury is actually having gone all the way back to Aquarius, is coming forward again, almost to the 12-degree point, which is where it's retrograded. So we say it's still in its retrograde shadow. It's an unusually long one of 3 additional weeks beyond the retrograde station to direct motion of March 9th. So we are still kind of climbing out of that, but we're getting close to being out of that. And I think that this is kind of a signal to go forward with ideas that we've been churning, that we've been maybe reflecting on, maybe an idea that we had going in January and early February, and then we had this retrograde, and we have different ways of looking at things. It's given us a lot of introspection. It's given us a lot of time to reflect on what's going on with us. And as we do, we don't want to forget that Mars and Pluto in combination is very tricky that way. It does have a lot to do with hidden anger. You can consider this kind of the volcano of anger situation. And of course, that completely depends on how much has gone before. In other words, the tendency is to stuff our anger. And when we do that and we don't stay in touch with that anger, and we kind of try to paper it over, bury it below in our unconscious and not go there, not connect to it. And this goes for any trauma, any kind of early childhood trauma that doesn't get dealt with rather well, rather thoroughly. It festers, it gets to be kind of stuck and lodged inside us, something that we do well to connect to. So this inner work we've been possibly up to over these past few weeks can really reflect back on getting in touch with that inner wounding, and that is sure the province of Chiron. So the fact that this new moon is so close to Chiron really makes me think it's a good time to be examining ourselves even more assiduously, doing what's necessary to relieve the pressure of those hidden woundings within us and come to some better understanding. And they say that you have to invite the lost parts of yourself to the table. There may be kind of broken off, active, Jung called it a complex, things broken off from our conscious way of doing things, kind of isolated in the unconscious, and we don't want to go there, we're maybe ashamed. And so rather than think about it, rather than deal with it, rather than work through it, rather than talk to the person who might be involved, the other person, who might be a parent, we wind up not going there at all. But the recipe, the recommendation to be more whole, to complete a greater project of integration of all our parts, which is necessary for our well-being and for our health, is to go there, to actually confront those places within. It doesn't have to be a difficult confrontation. Just become aware. Just watch what happens. So they say that you're never angry for the reason that you think you are. So if anger comes up in these times, in this particular, new moon time of the 24th, around that time, and even in the week leading up to it, when these planets were all very involved with each other with a 2-degree separation in the week starting from the 17th leading up to this. So, during this recent period, and in the next 30 days for that matter, pay attention, and if you do see there's that anger coming up, it may be something that you can go and check yourself on and say, why? Why am I getting so upset about this? And so a lot of times you find that it's really the triggering of something that is much deeper that you've had going on for so long. And when you can become more aware, that's the real important step, the first step. It doesn't have to be a daunting mountain climb, because that first step can be very significant, just to be aware, just to say, I know that I do things that are a little bit out of rationality, or out of even my own intuition, my own heart. Maybe it's turning down an offer to do a social engagement, and you say, they're inviting me to this picnic, but I'm saying, oh no, I couldn't possibly. And then just be aware of, oh, there it is again. There's that coming up again. That, why am I saying, where's that negative coming from? Is it feelings of self-worth that are not fully worked out from events that happened early in life? Those early events, those traumatic events that can come along as a child, very formative and affects us for the rest of our lives to some extent. And even when we understand it, and even when we make friends with these monsters that lie within us, they can be scary monsters that take us over sometimes. And just, when we rage, when somebody rages at the traffic. I mean, it's one way to take being cut off, which is to just be calm about it and say, what a jerk, he's cutting me off. And there's another way, which is to rage, and this happens in any kind of interpersonal communication, especially if somebody reminds you of your father or whatever. And this is when we really have the opportunity to just pay attention and just say, where's that coming from? What is up with that? They say count to 10. All right, well, count to 10 before you blurt something out and do some damage, because words can be wounding, words can be hurtful. But in that time, also reflect, where is that coming from within me? What is the deal here? What is that about? And just try to kind of suss it out. Of course, therapy helps if you need that or if you want that. But just self-therapy helps. If you're having a problem with somebody at work, not that you'd be seeing that person right now, but what you can do with a person that you're trying to deal with is you don't even have to have them there. You can just sit down to an imaginary meeting. You can pour tea for yourself, for the other, and just kind of have a conversation. And that, believe it or not, has an effect in the ether. That does tell somebody in some mystical way that there's something being worked out here, and your attitude changes and so will theirs. It's really quite remarkable. But I'm getting a little bit off the topic here, but we do want to just pay attention on a personal basis to what this Mars-Pluto together and highlighted, magnified by the presence of Jupiter, which magnifies things. And then we want to look at the other combinations as well. So there's good news too. Jupiter being involved with Mars means there's a lot of energy, a lot of physical energy. You might want to run that off. You might want to do something physical. It's recommended now while we're staying in place to go out and exercise, and not to, if you had a yoga class you were going to, well, by George, you can do it at home, right? You don't have to go to classes. You can do all kinds of stuff. And there is a lot of energy in this configuration. A lot of energy, too, for the transformation, which really Pluto represents. Pluto represents coming to terms with change, recognizing you can't hold on. The wheel is turning. It's got to turn around. You can't let go and you can't hold on. You can't go forward and you can't go back. You can't stand still. That's the Grateful Dead song, The Wheel. But anyway, just to recognize that there's a process, an evolutionary process that we're in the midst of, each one of us, very much accelerated in this particular timing with the Saturn-Pluto this year. And that, it might involve giving something up. And we can see now in the culture we're very much giving something up. We're giving up all of our economic activity for a period of time, which is really quite startling. But if you think about it, it might have a spiritual effect. This might be something that we benefit from in some ways, even though it's going to be very difficult and the government's going to have to find the money to get people through. But maybe there will be a benefit in terms of thoughtfulness, in terms of having a chance to reconnect with people that we don't have time to connect with when we're busy with our business activities. Connecting with each other, making a recognition that we're all in a common situation, a common humanity, and getting ourselves and everybody else through this until there is, which there will be, a treatment at some point, and then, of course, eventually a vaccine, probably not for, maybe they say a year and a half. So anyway, this is the situation we're in, and we can take advantage of it on a personal basis by not freaking out, by thinking that maybe there's a spiritual things behind it. Anytime something happens, it's useful to think, well, what's the universe up to? What is the lesson here? What am I being taught? How is there a way that I can see this as a positive, as a change that had to happen, that I have more time to myself, I can reflect on things, I have more time to do that reading I was wanting to do, whatever it might be, and to make some really deep connections with your close people, your partner, your important people in your life. Don't neglect to connect with them, especially in this time of trouble, when things might be changing even more drastically for some individual who knows. So this is all part of the mix right now, and it's something I'd like to talk about. And like I say, the thing to majorly reflect upon is that where I was saying, and a lot of astrologers were saying, that Saturn-Pluto was the big deal. It happens in January 10th to 12th, and then again November 15th of 2020. Look at that arc of development. Look what's happening at the end of the year, big changes. We might want to just think also that this is another Pluto point in the year. This the 24th, it was even a week before that. It was getting really intense because there were 2-degree separation between these same three planets. So, and Mars, of course, was back further. So, it's very interesting to see this configuration. Just last week, and as this was coming up, I was thinking, well, it's kind of dire right now, isn't it? My gosh, on the 17th, I think it was, the Bay Area, where I live, the Bay Area of California, San Francisco area, was declared in lockdown. All businesses closed, everybody has to shelter in place. And that was dramatic because, the economic impact, the realization that you can't just go to your normal places, you can't just go to work as usual. And it's necessary, though, because of the separation, the social separation, social distancing. It's necessary. But it gives us time to think. And as I saw that coming up, I thought, well, gee, it's kind of early. I thought it was going to be big on the 24th. And then I looked, and this configuration was 2 degrees apart. So it's still, at 2 degrees apart, it's still pretty active. So there was a strong triple conjunction that was going on here. Then, secondly, what I'd like to mention in connection with this whole societal shift is that Saturn being at the 0 degree mark of Aquarius, that's very interesting because, there is going to be the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction on the 21st of December when Saturn does move back and then it moves forward and enters Aquarius that second time. It will be on the 21st of December. Jupiter will be with it. That Jupiter Saturn conjunction occurs every 20 years. It is considered to be another societal indicator. It's an air for the first time. People are saying, oh, maybe this is the age of Aquarius finally coming to be. It's an air for the first time. It's been in Earth signs for many years, about 100 or two. With one exception, there was an air sign exception in 1980. But, except for that, it's been in Earth all this time. And it's going to be an air for the next 100 years or more. So this is very interesting to see it start to be an air. And what's interesting in this particular new moon is that we do have Saturn at the 0 degree mark of Aquarius. It might be kind of a harbinger. It's like something to think about. Saturn, of course, itself is changing signs. That's significant. Saturn in Capricorn is one thing and definitely has to do with conservative empowerment. When Pluto entered Capricorn was 2008 when we had the financial shakeup. And then later Saturn came into Capricorn. It's been very powerful in terms of the hierarchical structure, in terms of limitations, in terms of conservative empowerment, people thinking that this is the way to do things to keep the structure and even the traditional structures intact as much as possible. And now it's all of a sudden in Aquarius. Just briefly, it retrogrades on May 10th. It takes a little while to go back into Capricorn again, and then these things happen in November with the triple conjunction with Jupiter and Pluto, as I've been alluding to. And then, finally, that bursting out into Aquarius for good, for 2.5 years, is December 21st with Jupiter, and that's the conjunction, the big conjunction of the beginning of air signs. So it's a very interesting time. And it does indicate that this is a transition year, that 2020 is a year. We're going to be going through a lot. It's no need to stress that point now. We're obviously going to be going through a lot. And what will come out on the other side is a different place. We won't be in the same world that we were in 2019. So that's something to think about. And what is that world that we're building, that we're imagining right now, that we're imaging, that we're coming to awareness about? What is that going to be like? And is there ways that we can make it more closer to what we really want? Can we make it more socially equitable? Can we heal this rapidly? It's been an eroding situation for decades. The 1% getting more and more and more of the wealth, and people being left behind at the lower middle and lower situation, economically. How can we protect these people? How can we bring them more into the table? How can we make it a more equitable society? And everybody contributes, according to their talents, and let the talents rage, let the diversity express itself in beautiful ways, and all of us come together in one big family of diverse and varied individuals, which all have something to share, something to contribute. I think it's a wonderful vision that has been not easy to get to. The 60s were some kind of attempt to get to that vision of having a caring society, having love be the the answer, love be the determining factor rather than money. And so now maybe we have a chance to get a little bit more towards that. And of course, the other big thing, society-wise, looming, is climate change. So is there a way that this might remind us, this devastating situation that the whole world is in right now, is that something that might remind us about how important it is to take care of the earth, how important it is to deal with this other looming societal disaster of climate change, millions of environmental refugees. You know, when the oceans rise, the sea level acidity destroys the coral reefs coming apart. Everything, you know, the air pollution as well, but of course the global warming, you know, the ice caps dwindling, all of this that we've been so aware of on the basis of science, but not so much at a gut level, and not so much people doing anything about it. And maybe it's time to take a good hard look at all these things and try to emerge from this with a better handle on what needs to happen for the future of the world, the future of the American society. And it's a powerful time. And with that, I would really like to look at the U.S. chart, because I think you'll find it quite interesting thinking about how these particular configurations, let's look at this new moon right here. How does that hit the U.S. chart? And of course, here's the 4-degree point, Sun and Moon, a 5-degree point of Chiron, 4-degree of Taurus, which I didn't mention, which is that semi-sextile is a very close semi-sextile between the Sun and Moon and Uranus. So we have a Uranus factor. Is there not unexpected events? Is there not surprise going on? And how does it hit the U.S. chart? And it's very interesting, really, because in the U.S. chart, we have the 3-degree mark and the 5-degree mark of Venus and of Jupiter. And this is the chart that really makes sense for the United States. 9/11 took place right across the ascendant-descendant of this chart. It was also Saturn and Pluto. Saturn was coming through here at 14 degrees. Pluto was at 12 degrees of Sag, and they were opposite each other right across this line. So I feel like this is a very good chart for the U.S. That was a big watershed moment for the United States. Things changed rather dramatically in the society as Pluto came across the ascendant and as Saturn was opposed, and it was right around 9/11. August was the exact hit, I think, and then there was another one in October, so it was just basically bracketing the September event. So what I want to say about this chart is that we might want to recognize that Jupiter is the chart ruler, namely the identity, the United States of America, their sense of identity, which you could think of John Wayne on a horse. You could think of the horse as being part of the expansion of the American West, and it is part of the American identity. And then we have Venus is the midheaven ruler. So these two planets at 3 and 5, midpoint 4 degrees, right? For not just 4, of course, 4.5, something like that. But you know, here we have actually 4 degrees. You know, it's squaring that point, which is the midpoint, but it's also really, with Uranus being in the perfect sextile all this time, it's been a lot of changes there, and a lot of reaction and question marks about organization and confusion. And of course, also we have Neptune just about opposite the 22-degree mark of Virgo, is where Neptune resides. The 22-degree mark of Capricorn was where the first Saturn-Pluto conjunction took place, making a trine. So this has been activated to the Neptune in the U.S. chart. Think of it as perhaps a certain amount of confusion, perhaps a certain amount of idealism. You know, this country is very idealistic at base. You know, we have big ideas, big hopes, big plans. Anyway, the confusion has been evident because there's all this question about what is really going on with this coronavirus epidemic. You know, what is actually happening? So that's been a big factor all this year, from January onward. And in fact, the coronavirus was named as COVID-19 and defined as a new novel coronavirus on January 7th. And this, as I say, the conjunction at 22 degrees of Pluto and Saturn was at also January 10th. So, I mean, this is really part of the whole situation. So that makes me think that Pluto, Saturn, and Pluto by itself right now is all a big factor in this. And we can see that Pluto is at the 24-degree mark of Capricorn, directly across the zodiac from the Mercury in the U.S. chart. and so which is associated with media, being the communicative aspect of the entire nation. And it's also associated with the seventh house being the ruler of the seventh house cusp. So we have Jupiter, the ruler of the first house, we have Venus, the ruler of the midheaven, and then we have Mercury also involved with this Pluto opposition. So what's changing? Is our relationship with the rest of the world changing? I would say so. Is our notion of what's going on in the rest of the world involved in this pandemic? I would say so. And the question of travel bans and the question of looking at the other nations of the world to see how they're handling it, very, very central to this. The media is very central. If it wasn't for the media telling us what the whole world is thinking, what's going on, we'd be kind of at the mercy of this coronavirus without even knowing what to do. But as it is, because of all the reports that have come through, the intelligence, the information ruled by Mercury, because of the media being able to apprise us of all this situation around the world and within our own country, we are very aware, more than we ever have been, of everything that's happening. Of course, right now, our social interaction depends on technology, perhaps also ruled by Mercury. So, I mean, and this is in the 8th house of connection. So the 8th house of connection in the U.S. chart, and then Mercury sitting there, and of course the North Node as well, and then this Pluto on, for so many, starting in January and then now right at 24 degrees, and then in November 15th, by the way, Pluto will also be at 24 degrees again when we have this triple conjunction, including Jupiter, which will go back and come forward. So I think the media is very much wrapped up in this whole thing. And in fact, I was saying in my little piece I did on the coronavirus that Mars, the fact that Mars is in this configuration, and there may be a certain amount of sniping going on, between the media and the administration. I could see that. You see they're double checking on everything that Trump does or says, and there's a big, and he calls it the enemy of the people. The press is the enemy of something. So anyway, I think it's quite interesting to see all this coming out, and you can see it reflected in the chart. And again, with Chiron involved, Chiron is closer to the 5-degree mark. That's a perfect square. This activated Chiron, and it has to do with the Jupiter, which is the chart ruler. The United States is suffering through this. And the other thing that we have to mention and not forget about when we think about this configuration, which I haven't mentioned yet, is Eris. So Eris is at 23 degrees of Aries. It is exactly square to these things. It'll be square to them again in November 15th. And Eris being part of this configuration is very interesting because Eris turns out to be a very important planet. It's probably just as important as Pluto in charts from my research. I thought that was a rather bold statement when I first started the research, but it's true. I mean, because they're the same astronomical category of dwarf planet, and they're both prominent in the Kuiper belt, Eris just as much as Pluto, same size, brighter, more dense. The thought was that Eris might be just as important as Pluto in charts, which is a hard pill, hard to swallow that, but yes, it does seem to be. It's anywhere in the chart, it makes a difference. If it's in a particular house, that house is significant. And it makes contact with the planet, that planet becomes quite significant. So Eris is like a feminine warrior, I call it, for soul intention. In other words, going to depth, understanding what you most deeply believe and acting on that basis, acting from your heart, acting from what only you can say, this is it. And, instead of acting in a false way, in an inauthentic way, responding to the situation as the society kind of gears you toward, and the consensus thinking is heading you toward. It's having your own way of looking at it. Paradigm shifters that change the way society is, that change the way we think about things, science breakthroughs. These are all people that have strong Eris in their charts. Feminists, all the leading feminists had strong Eris in their charts. I couldn't find one that didn't. So think about that Eris is involved in this, and more than ever, individual initiative is so important in dealing with this pandemic, because as you know, we all have to do the right thing. We all have to handle ourselves in a way that helps the society overcome this, the spread of this epidemic, to flatten the curve, as they say, to keep our social distancing and try not to get it, and try not to give it to others and try to slow down the spread of the infection, which is going to overwhelm the hospitals pretty soon here. So we're in a dire situation, but once again, the individual rises to the occasion, and the more so, the better it'll be. Individual health workers, individual responders, individual governors are really rising to the occasion, I feel. And individuals, every single individual, not only is it important that every single individual vote when we get to the November election and we try to decide who's going to run the country next, but it's so important that every individual stand up and be counted, do what they feel is right, act on that, maybe vociferously, maybe make noise, make a wave. This is the way it should go. This is what needs to happen. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. You have to do it. You have to take part. You have to be, and it's a very empowering thing, because if you don't do it, you're just kind of at the mercy of these waves of the society, what the society is constraining you. But if you speak for yourself as an individual and see where you want to go and go that way, and see what's happening, you have to have awareness. You have to do it with knowledge of what really makes sense. So finding your basic truth, finding what's true in you and only what you believe, what only motivates you from the deepest level, you can really make a difference and rise to the occasion. Okay, we want to take a few questions. Do we have any? Okay, so if you do have questions, of course, of a general nature is the best. I mean, we can't really take questions like, please tell me about my chart. We can take questions about a particular kind of configuration in your chart. I am being the voice of Leslie. Let people know that they can put their questions into the comments. That we have comments that are on the Facebook Live, on the broadcast. Suzanne. Okay. How would a retired person interpret the 2nd and the 10th houses? I see what she's saying there, because the 10th is your career and the 2nd is your money. And it has to do with resources, and it has to do with earning a living. So somebody that's in the midst of a job could very well associate that career that they're up to and the 2nd house as well with their productivity and how they're living their life, what their resources are, how they're building their resources. Now, I think it's just as important for a retired person to be aware of those houses, because, the 10th house is really your manifestation in the outer world, and that doesn't have to be through a job. It doesn't have to be through a particular career. I mean, you can change careers. It does have to do with the heart of your career. So in other words, I think everybody that's doing whatever they're doing needs to be questioning that. And if it matches their soul desire, if they're doing what they feel like they're supposed to do, hey, that's great. On the other hand, though, if they feel like there's a falseness there, if they feel like they're not doing the thing they're supposed to be doing, but there's something else that they should be doing, the classic musician or actor that was following his father's footsteps because he was told by his parents he couldn't very well go off and be a starving artist and have anything happen for himself. Maybe it's time to become a starving artist and have everything happen for yourself. Now, similarly, the 2nd house. The 2nd house has to do with your environment. It has to do with your body. It has to do with keeping up with your values as well, your resources and your values, as well as your finances. Of course, your finances don't stop. If you're retired, you still have to have finances. So it's still a very important house, even though, the very superficial thing might be earning money. It has to do with really your deepest values. So actually they connect, the 2nd and the 10th house connect in that way, because if you're acting on your deepest values, which I always say Aries is about, so look where Aries is in your chart, then you're coming to the right place, and that would be dictating what you do in the world, how you become known to your fellow humans for what your contribution might be. And it could be volunteer work, or it could be anything. It could be saying what you believe. That's as simple as that. You're making an influence. The 10th house is really about influencing society, and you want to see the improvement. You want to see society shine, to be the best that it can be. So what you're doing should be ideally contributing to that. Okay, got another one? Nan has got one. Hi, Nan. Well, one thing I've been saying about the coronavirus, and there's a piece on the website called The Astrology of COVID-19, is that I think because we can see this timing of the January 10th conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, and then to be followed by this November 15th event, that it's, and they do say that it may respond to the heat in the summer. It may wilt in the heat, the coronavirus, like the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu came along in 1918, but the worst year was in the winter of 1918, 1919. So they found it. It was worldwide pandemic. The summer months came, and it eased off like the flu does generally. So the thing is, they had this sort of major epidemic that they thought, oh my God, this is terrible, this is the worst thing. And then it eased off and people were relieved, but then it came roaring back in the fall when the cold weather hit, and the winter and the winter of 1918 and the winter of 1919, it was still 1919 in January, February, March, and that was a very, very, very difficult time. That was the majority of the deaths, which was pretty major from the Spanish flu of that era, 100 years ago. So if it follows a similar pattern, it may be, and I'm guessing because they do say that there is probably, I did receive one note from a person in Europe that said that they had heard from somebody that was in China during the epidemic that it won't stand 26 degrees or 27 degrees Celsius, which is 78 to 80 degrees. So in other words, when it gets really hot, we may find that the transmission is reduced. We may find that there's a relief from it, and it does kind of go away for a while. But that would indicate, if that was the case, that probably the number of deaths from it would come back around the cold weather, and so November 15th may be a very serious time for this epidemic. I mean, it's just one way to look at it, but it makes some sense to me, associating the Saturn-Pluto, which we'll see again in November, with this event, with this coronavirus outbreak. And of course, the good news, though, is long-term, there will be a treatment that succeeds. They will find a treatment, maybe by the end of the year, maybe sooner. A treatment is easier to find than a vaccination because the vaccination has to be thoroughly vetted. If they find a vaccination, they say that they want 14 months of testing because you can't, once you get it to the point of a worldwide inoculation, which they will do, they would want a worldwide inoculation against COVID-19, so they have to have it right. If you have something with side effects and you don't find the side effects and you inoculate everybody, that's not good. That's a bad situation. So they have to take their time with the vaccine. They're saying it'll be a year more, so maybe a year from now we'll have a vaccine. But as far as the treatment, that could be sooner. And what I'm saying, actually what I started to say before I get into the details of treatments and vaccines, is that basically, just like the Spanish flu, just like different virus that has come along, there will be at some point a treatment and a vaccine, and we won't have this anymore. And once we do, then normal life will resume. It won't resume. It won't be the same. It'll never be the same. I mean, we're going through a transformation in this society, a transition that will not ever be the same on the other side of it. That's my belief. But as far as where it's headed, I do think we're in for a long siege that it may take over a year before we get out of this situation that we're in. So that's all. I'm obviously not the expert to say. I'm no epidemiologist to say what's really going on, but it does seem dire from everything I've heard on the news about what the epidemiologists are saying, what the true experts are saying about it. Go ahead with another question. Kristen. Well, the question is, having a Mars-Pluto conjunction natally, right? And in the first house, thanks. And that being the case, what's it like for me now, especially considering my Saturn return has this Mars-Pluto in it? And I guess they have a birthday, well, I don't know, I'm assuming they must have a birthday right around now if they have this. Well, if it's the same Mars-Pluto conjunction as we're seeing in this conjunction, I mean in this configuration. Anyway, yes, you're more sensitive to it, and of course the answer is that you've grown. I mean, if you have a Mars-Pluto conjunction in your first house, it's probably been pretty dominant factor. You know, there may be tendencies to anger. There may be this so-called volcano situation where it gets, instead of expressed, pushed down and pushed down and pushed down until it explodes. You know, that's how a volcano happens. And if so, I mean, this is your opportunity, isn't it? Because as you've lived your life, you've gone through different, you know, what it is also a great deal of energy. So it's not, don't misunderstand, it's not a negative thing. I want to be careful to say that it is a very positive thing, because you have lots of energy. You're like a very strong, energetic, forceful person, and you make things happen. And then, you know, as you develop, you know, there's teenage years and there's young adult years and there's adult years and mature years. And as you develop, you get a handle on it and you understand how best to use it. And this is your opportunity to have another Mars-Pluto in your solar return. Makes me think second time around, almost like having a Saturn return. You know, you get a better handle on your Saturn. This is a similar configuration in a solar return. I would think it would be a good chance to look at that. You know, has that been working for you? Has that worked out? Can you improve on it? Is there a way you can make friends with any issues you have with it? Like if there is anger issues, can you come to better terms with that and say, what is that? Because anger is just an emotion. Nothing wrong with anger. Anger is perfectly normal and perfectly fine. I mean, if you stub your toe, you yell, and you might take a kick, you might take a swipe at the piece of furniture, and it's kind of normal, you know, but it can be damaging when it's a person. So what you have to do is be aware and channel it and try to understand where it's coming from and try to go to the source of it and that kind of thing. And I think you've probably made progress on that through your life, and this is a chance to really work out with it, you know. Pay attention. You have to pay attention. So I guess that's what I'll say. Got another. Okay, it's inner makeup. I didn't get all that. I'm sorry. Well, the Aries ingress wouldn't... okay, the question is, Mars is tearing through Capricorn and amplifying some of those energies like Jupiter and Pluto as it goes through. And then will the Aries ingress... oh, there's the Aries ingress of the Sun and Moon, but I think he might be talking about the Aries ingress of Mars. Or which Aries ingress, do we know? I guess we can't tell. Well, the question was, will the Aries ingress be helpful? And I'm not sure I can go along with that completely, although what we would say with Mars entering Aries is that's Mars's place to shine. Mars rules Aries. So that would be a time when we would maybe have a chance to come to a better understanding of the Mars factor with our own lives, wherever it is in our chart. You want to take a look at that. You want to be, if you're thinking about Mars and you're thinking about the Mars ingress into Aries, and you could be thinking also about just this March 19th ingress of the Sun, which is already happening, the Sun into Aries. which is an ingress into Aries that the sun makes. Maybe that's what he's referring to. Anyway, will it be helpful? Yes, because in any case, it's directing your attention. And when you put your attention somewhere, it's always helpful because you're always looking into what the factor is. And of course, the thing to do also, a big clue here, is to look at where Mars resides in your own chart, try to suss that out and figure out how that's impacting other planets in your chart, how your Mars is. What condition is your Mars? Is your Mars in a good condition, or is it negatively aspected in some ways, or not easy, having squares or something like that? And just think about that. Think about what Mars means to you, and then reflecting on that and doing a meditation on that, as would be appropriate for this Aries time. That would be very useful. And just any time you put your attention inward and try to figure out what is the meaning of this factor in my life, you're doing yourself a big favor. So that's all I'll say about that, I guess. I'm sorry, could you say the name again? Ligon, okay. So the question was, what about the fact that Chiron is currently in aspect with these big players in Capricorn, namely Jupiter and Pluto specifically? Chiron being in a quintile, pretty close quintile actually, with Jupiter right now. Well, I can speak to the natal chart. That doesn't exactly cover the whole transiting situation, but maybe it's a good starting point. I've discovered, and I think many astrologers have discovered, that Jupiter and Chiron in combination is usually a wound of beliefs. In other words, there was maybe a stifling situation, stifling from the some people grow up in a situation and they just chime with their parents' beliefs, and that's a beautiful thing. They come along and then they're same place as their parents, and they grow into a similar, you see all the time, fantastic actor. They started because their parents were actors, or fantastic musician. Their parents were these really great musicians, and they just grew up with it from infancy onward. But there's also the other situation, which is where there's one belief system operating at the parental level, and it's not comfortable or compatible with the personality of the child coming up. And there's a painful situation there, where you have to peel yourself away from that parental situation. And so I see that all the time in a natal chart, talking to the person. I sometimes call it the Catholic aspect, which is kind of a joke, but basically that you have to go a different way, and you have to say, sorry mom, sorry dad, I really need to go my own way on this. I have to be a hippie, or I have to be a Christian, And so anyway, that's the natal situation. Now, seeing it here in the sky, I would associate it in a similar way, that there may be a belief system that is causing problems. So it may be that we're looking at various ways to conceptualize beliefs, to conceptualize future orientation, and there may be a painful process in place right now with, that's not matching. There may be a way that the society is heading in a direction that doesn't match up and creates pain. I'm a struggling artist, and I'm not being taken care of by the society. I don't have my artist stipend. What's going on with that? I'm really struggling, and then I'm left off the stimulus package because I'm not making very much income, so the stimulus is proportional to previous income, and I'm screwed. I mean, those kind of things would be part of this. It would be a way of recognizing where the beliefs and attitudes of the society are out of alignment with my attitude, with my feelings. And you could also say it's just amping up the pain. You could say that there's an angsty situation going on, which God knows there is, and that so looking at the mundane astrology, and because of the fact that Chiron is hitting the Jupiter of the U.S. chart, which happens to be the chart ruler of the U.S. chart, as I was outlining earlier, the fact that Jupiter is part of the configuration making almost exact quintile with this Chiron just in the sky, just in this new moon chart, you could say that there's a angsty thing that's going on. It's just being magnified with the Jupiter contact. That's another way to look at it. And that also, if you think about Pluto, Pluto has its greatness to it. I mean, Pluto is, oh my God, we're transforming, we're changing. The butterfly is turning into, the caterpillar is turning into a butterfly, and it's a marvelous thing. It's a marvelous transformational event that's going to result in great heights of beauty and of soaring wings. But it's not much fun for the caterpillar. So it's a difficult time. Transformation can be difficult, is difficult, and there's pain involved in that. Maybe we could look at it that way. So I'll take another one, I guess. We're sorting through. Leslie wants me to inform you that she's in communication with me and she's feeding me these questions. Just in case you're wondering. Defreen? Oh, okay. Well, Defreen apparently is a Cancer, but she's also an Aquarius rising, and she finds them rather different. And she's wondering who she really is. And it's interesting, she wants to know which one to follow. And so, it's interesting because they say that the rising sign is kind of your appearance. Like if you're Leo rising, you probably have big hair, maybe, And so the thing about the rising sign, though, it's very interesting. It's what you see is what you get, because the rising sign is actually your secret code of who you really are at depth. There's kind of a soul purpose involved in your ascendant. So your Aquarius ascendant, you're very different from your Cancer self. Sometimes there's more of a chime, right? But I think it's important to recognize that we are a multiplicity. Walt Whitman had that phrase in his poetry. He said, "I contain multitudes." And there is a very nurturing part of you. There is a very kind of maybe a little, the crab is a little scared sometimes, to come out and has to hide under a rock. There is a little bit of that. And then the Aquarius is more like, I'm sure out there and I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm large and in charge, and you have to deal with it. So both of those are probably different elements of your personality. I wouldn't say either one of them is the whole story. So I wouldn't say, no, you have to be an Aquarius, don't forget about being a Cancer. But on the other hand, they say Aquarius is your kind of secret code. Your ascendant can be your secret code to maybe your soul intention. And so it's important to pay attention to your rising for sure, and that's a good part of who you are. But we are multiple. We have a lot of things going on within us, and they're sometimes contradictory even. So I think that's the way to look at it. That it's all good. It's all important. Follow everything. Okay. Kabir. Okay. That's good. Well, so he's asking, he has Jupiter and Saturn going through his 10th house. Saturn's obviously a little ahead and of the Jupiter. And he's saying he has a pretty big stellium in his 10th house, and he's wondering what the effect is of these two particular planets moving through. And he wants to know if it's always a big deal or if it can sometimes just be not much happening. And of course, the answer to that last part of the question, maybe there's not much happening, is you don't always know at the time. There is that old thing of, oh my God, I just lost my job. It's the worst thing that ever happened to me 10 years later. Oh my God, I lost my job that day. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. But anyway, so Saturn moving through the 10th, it is an important time. It is greater recognition for who you are, what you're up to. It could be accolades. You could be, it sounds like it's not getting promoted in your job or getting a new career going or suddenly being a big hit in the social scene or the stand-up comedy or whatever it might be you're doing. It may not be so obvious, but it is a shift. It is an important shift. And I would say it might even be, it's kind of a coming out sort of thing. So there may be a way that you're actualizing what's really going on for you, and maybe you're coming to a new way of operating that will eventually bear fruit. It may be that the beginning of it is, I don't know where the 10th house lies, whether Saturn's gone very far through there or not, but you may find as Saturn gets further into your 10th house, if that hasn't happened yet, that more and more things happen. It's a big time for sure. Saturn in your 10th is a big time. And then Jupiter coming along is also good. Jupiter in your 10th house is luck, good luck with circumstances, that unexpected connection that leads to great opportunities, that kind of thing. So it's good timing. Yeah, very good. So we can only take a couple more questions. Do we have a lot left? Or? Well, why don't you pick the two most important, because we do have to wind up, I think. Lida. Oh boy, yeah. Well, that's interesting. So she says that the new moon, which is at 4 degrees of Aries, is conjunct her natal Eris at 4 degrees of Aries, which is a very important new moon because it'll bring Aries to your to your consciousness. Yeah, Eris. I think Eris is always important in a chart. I said before, the house, the position. What I discovered when I was doing all that research for the book, which is called The 10th Planet, which is on Amazon, which is tons of information about this take on Eris, which is feminine warrior, which she is in the mythology, and in the accident of her naming, which is no accident, right, that she was called Xena for Planet X when she was first discovered by Mike Brown's group, and then they decided Xena was a good name for, maybe the real name should be Eris, which was a name that hadn't been used for an asteroid. A lot of the names got sucked up by all the asteroids, right? But Eris was not being used, so they went for it. And it is a feminine warrior. It was the sister of the god of war. Followed him willingly into the battle and delighted in the groans of the dying. So I just started looking at that feminine warrior, what's that about, and realized it comes from deep purpose. It's a warrior for deep purpose, not for anything superficial, not for mercenary or just to win a bet or to please the king. It's fighting for your own reasons, your own deep reasons, like the feminists, all the feminists that I could find. So having the new moon right there means that you're taking on your leadership in a new way. So maybe there's a way that you've been ducking, not doing the full-on Eris, not really coming out, not really shining in that regard, that maybe you could see that as a shift, that as I started to say, I didn't finish my sentence, when I was doing the research, I found that the house position was invariably important to these people. And so in the back of the 10th planet is a cookbook section, and it has these paragraphs that I wrote for the 12 houses, and they invariably ring a chime for somebody. So I could refer you to that or to the TimePassages software standard edition, which happens to be on sale, by the way, which does give you the Eris interpretation. So you can just click on that Eris and whatever house it's in, that paragraph comes up. And like I say, they've been very well received. People recognize themselves in them. And that is what is being renewed for you with this new moon conjunct. Anytime a new moon conjuncts an element in your chart, it's a significant occurrence. So don't skip it over, and do meditate on where your true leadership seems to be, and if you're fully exercising that inner authority, that sense of authentic personality and leadership that you have. So what's the other one? Yeah, sure. We have 2 more coming. Paula. Okay, very good. She's bringing up something that I forgot to mention when I was talking about the new moon. I'll have to give a little background. So the planets Haumea and Makemake are in a similar situation with Eris. They were named as dwarf planets by the IAU, the International Astronomical Union, and there's no plans for them to name more. So the 4 that are in the Kuiper belt of these dwarf planets, or what I call them planets, Pluto, Eris, Haumea, and Makemake. And Haumea is very interesting. It seems to be a very profound connection to nature and to natural law, to the idea that the subconscious is really part of nature, that mythology connects us to nature. Joseph Campbell has a very strong amount of Haumea, and I found it in several philosophers that were considered nature philosophers. So it's very interesting and very powerful and very important and very present. And it is 27 degrees of Libra. You know, we did have recently Saturn going through that point of a sextile, no, not a sextile, but square, excuse me, from Capricorn. And now, being in 0 degrees of Aquarius, there is the midpoint of Mars and Saturn, which is still making a square to Haumea. So Haumea is prominent, and you can see all the red lines just here in this chart right in front of us, right, to Haumea. And then we have Makemake. Now, Makemake is also a profound connection to nature. It was the creation god of Rapa Nui. And both of these are named after indigenous gods and goddesses, which all reveals right there a connection, I believe, to nature. And that's been my research. So there's an article in the Mountain Astrologer that just came out, the April edition of the Mountain Astrologer that I wrote, that is about Makemake as more the activist of the pair, and Haumea as profound connection to nature. And I try to show with some example charts how very powerful these new planets really are. And of course their issue is Earth issues as far as the activism, and that couldn't be more timely with all our climate change issues that are in the society right now. Now, in particular, Makemake is directly across the zodiac from this new moon and from Chiron. So Makemake is really in the soup right now, in the mix of this new moon. And as the listener was pointing out, we also have a yod from Mercury and Uranus, because they're both making an inconjunct to Makemake. So what would be Uranus and Mercury? Well, it would be thinking about, communicating about, having realizations with Uranus, having unexpected happenings that give you unexpected realizations, like this coronavirus, you could say, is an unexpected happening that gives us new realizations about Earth issues. And one thing about that is there's an article about the skies over Wuhan, which used to be pretty polluted, but because they shut the whole city down, there are beautiful blue skies over Wuhan. Now, you know, in China, that's so interesting, isn't it, to think about the upside of this economic slowdown. You know, here we're doing what we can't possibly do, right? We're doing this thing of economic shutdown, and yet look at the unintended consequence of that we can have a beautiful sky over Wuhan, China. You know, it's like recognizing that some of the economic activity, especially, I believe, the fracking in particular, fossil fuels in general, since they're heating up the atmosphere, you know, because of the carbon content. It's a very powerful time for recognizing the issues of the Earth. And here we have Chiron directly opposite Makemake in this new moon, when this coronavirus is happening worldwide, and we're all coming to some recognition of what we're up to as a species, as a human race, to affect in a not good way the Earth situation. So I think environmental activism is really important right now, and I think it's really coming to the fore in a certain way in this situation that we're in. And I know Rick Tarnas also wrote a very poignant, very short, poignant piece on Facebook saying, you know, there's a lot of difficulty with this coronavirus, but just think it might be the beginning of a recognition, the recognition of the science of epidemiology, which is part of our response, could be the beginning of a recognition of the science of climate change, which has been largely ignored because people look outside and they don't see the world tumbling, they don't see the sky falling. But it really is falling, and it's very important that we all recognize that. And maybe this period of time is the beginning of a change in that attitude, and one can only hope so. So that's very powerful. What's going on with these new nature planets in this current configuration of this new moon, and I expect there will be some kind of a factor. Well, for one thing, just the shutting down of industry is a factor in slowing the carbonization of the atmosphere, at least for this period of time. And there's another way of looking at this whole tragic event of coronavirus, worldwide pandemic, as maybe the Earth is just saying, enough industry, let's take a break. So I guess that's what I have to say about that. Okay, Leslie says that was a good place to land, and we're going to stop the questions at that point. I think we've run out of time. It's gone over an hour. I didn't mean to go quite so long, but it was very fruitful question and answer, so I'm glad we did it. And we do want to mention that the software is on sale. I believe it's all 3 editions. Is that right? Yeah, we're celebrating International Astrology Day, which is the 21st. And you could even think of it as the 19th, which is when the sun actually entered Aries, which is the equinox. And of course, we're doing it from the whole weekend. I think it's from now until the end of the weekend. And it's 30% off of all of our software editions and also of the reports as well. So I wanted to be sure to mention that because, we think it's a valuable thing to study astrology and learn how these things are influencing our own charts, our own lives. How our charts are a reflection of what's going on with us is what I really wanted to say, because, the stars do not compel, they say. The stars incline, they do not compel. In other words, it's not like the planets are making you do anything. It's just that the way the universe is constructed, somehow there's this symbolic resonance with what we can see around us in the meanings that are attributed to the planets. It's just an amazing additional level and additional dimensionality of our existence, which is beyond cause and effect, which is just there. And it's magic, and it's spiritual, and it's just a beautiful thing for we astrologers that study it all the time, just to see God in action, or the universe in action, to let us know what's really happening in our lives. You can look into the meanings of these things and get more depth in understanding what's going on with your life, and it's very valuable that way. So let me switch out of this and switch back and just say that this is a difficult time. We all have so much to deal with, including possible dislocation with family members or adults in our lives. Not the kids so much, thank God. But it's so hard, and we just have to remember there's a silver lining, that the universe is on our side, and things happen for a reason, and we're at least able to take individual action that is a benefit. We can take care of each other. We can take care of each other by obeying the shelter-in-place law rules, because that's really intended to slow the spread of the virus and to keep the hospitals from getting overwhelmed. And that's the situation we're in right now. And look at Italy. I mean, it's terrible. So keep the faith, stiff upper lip, hold on, hang on, and have faith in the universe to see us through. Take care. Talk to you in a couple of weeks.